Mr. Rosenbaum, you're the BBC's FOI specialist.
Yeah.
Would you recommend all newsrooms to have someone like you in their midst?
Well, I think it depends on how a news organisation is organised, and obviously it depends on how many journalists you have and what the extent of the specialisation is. But I think there's certainly a lot to be gained by having someone who's got some kind of specialist knowledge of the Freedom of Information Act, because the more specialist knowledge you've got, you're better informed about how to phrase a request to get the information, what kind of information you're likely to get, what you won't get, what you're likely to get within the cost limit, and so on. So there's obviously a lot of advantages to having some specialisation.
Okay. How did you manage to get your very own spot on the BBC website?
Well, that was because when the BBC started blogs, which was back in 2007, if I remember correctly, journalists who wanted to write a blog on the BBC website, you had to make an application. There was some kind of internal competition, effectively. And I suggested doing a blog about freedom of information, and it was one of the successful ideas that were accepted, and it became one of the BBC blogs.
Okay.
So that's how that started.
Yeah. The FOI Act in the UK is still quite young, if I'm correct. Does the average procedure for you, FOI procedure, pose many obstacles?
It's still quite young, but that's not necessarily connected to the obstacles in a way. I mean, the thing about once you're used to how an act works, in a way, because you know what obstacles you're likely to encounter, you put in requests that aren't going to meet those obstacles by and large, because generally what I'm doing, I'm trying to get information that I actually think I'm likely to get. There are other people who may be putting in requests for information in order to prove a point, because they want to say this information should be in the public domain. I'm not doing that so much. I'm working within how I know the Act operates. And so if I think a request would go over the cost limit, I narrow it down before I put it in. So in a way, I'm trying to preempt the obstacles.
Okay. But the FOI Act, you say, is quite open. I mean, there's not like a... it's been in force for 7 years, and I think we've all learned how to use it better. But there's still... the big problem is delay. And actually, that I have to say, it is getting better because the Information Commissioner has speeded up a lot. But still, the big problem is delay in that sometimes you can wait several weeks, sometimes you can wait several months for the answer to a tricky FOI request. And then if you appeal, that can take several months. You go to the Commissioner, that can take several months. I think delay is the biggest practical problem in the system. So you have to plan your stories or your procedures?
Yeah, I mean, FOI is only of use for, if you get the information, it's still going to be a story in a few weeks or even a few months' time. It's not something that's of use for daily journalism, it's only for long-term journalism.
Yeah, exactly. What did you do before the FOI Act came into force then?
Well, I was a BBC journalist. Most of my time is actually spent producing radio documentaries. The FOI work is only one side of it. And I did the radio documentaries and other radio programming in the political programs department where I'm based. I did that before the FOI Act came into force, and when FOI came into force I developed a specialism in it, and it's become added to my role.
Okay. Where do you get your ideas and inspiration? Could you name some of the best cases you've heard or you've done yourself maybe? What are you most proud of?
Well, one case that I had to go to the Information Commissioner to get the information in the end, because it was turned down by the Department for Transport, but I think it was quite an important case, was to do with cars and the annual test that cars have to pass in order to be proved that they're safe and reliable and roadworthy, which is called the MOT test. And any car over 3 years has to take this test every year. I wanted to get information on which makes and models of cars are most likely to pass or fail that test. That request for information was turned down by an agency which was part of the Department for Transport. I eventually got the information. It arrived in a 1,200-page PDF. That was once the Information Commissioner had ruled in my favour. I then had to analyse it in terms of isolating the models that had the best safety records and the worst safety records. But that seemed to me practical information that is absolutely of use to the public at large, to have that information in the public domain. And it took about 2 years to get that.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for the interview.
That's a pleasure.